Welcome to the PEEP Podcast. I'm your host, Nicolle, and the goal of this show is to share how scientists and researchers study parapsychology and the paranormal, most of which fit under the umbrella term psi, and relate that to how people experience the paranormal in their everyday lives. Science plus psi. It's more normal than you think. On this episode, we're talking about ghost tours. You know, the things tourists do when they visit a town and want to hear about the spooky side of its history. I'll admit that I've taken a few. Wilmington, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and Seattle, Washington come to mind. For me, it's actually a really good way to learn about the down and dirty history of a town. Anyone can look up the Convention and Visitors Bureau's Sunshine and Happiness Town History and get the facade they'd like to present. That's all well and good, but to get the whole story, you need to understand just what might have created the city's ghost. Believe it or not, ghost tours have been the subject of parapsychological research. The study I'm going to share with you tonight isn't about whether a ghost exists, though. It's about whether taking a ghost tour can increase a person's belief in ghosts. Belief, that's where the psychology in parapsychology comes in. Actually, just to be clear, here's the definition of parapsychology. Noun: the study of mental phenomena which are excluded from or inexplicable by orthodox scientific psychology, such as hypnosis, telepathy, etc. After I share just how this subject was studied by researchers, we'll talk with Parris, who runs Ghost Hunters of Asheville Tours. She'll tell us how her experience running a ghost tour company compares to what the study found, and she'll explain why Asheville is just so haunted. Let's dive in. The research article I'm sharing tonight can be found in the Journal of Parapsychology, 2019, Volume 83, Number 1, pages 47 through 68. It was written by William Langston and Tyler Hubbard of Middle Tennessee State University, and it's titled Shadow Walking: Will a Ghost Walk Tour Affect Belief in Ghosts? I'll read you the abstract and then summarize and paraphrase the basic info in the article, and I strongly suggest that if you're interested in learning more about this particular study, you look it up online. One way to gain access to the Journal of Parapsychology is to become a sustaining member of the Rhine Research Center. No, this is not an advertisement for the Rhine. I am a sustaining member, and this is one of the perks. Check out episode 1 of this podcast for more on the Rhine. Here's the abstract to the study, directly quoting. There's a strong relation between personal experience and belief in ghosts. The research reported here investigated whether other people's experiences conveyed in a ghost walk tour could also influence belief. We surveyed participants before and after the ghost tour to evaluate changes in belief as a result of the tour. For participants who started out lower on the ghost belief scale, the tour did increase their belief. The tour had no effect on non-ghost related paranormal beliefs. The data were evaluated against a model suggesting that the variables influencing the updating of beliefs are different from the variables related to the formation of belief. The model provided a good account for the data and suggests directions for future research. Okay, so here's how the study worked. 2 researchers worked with the Shadow Chasers of Middle Tennessee, a ghost investigation team who run the Shadow Walk Tour in October in Murfreesboro. The 2 researchers learned the ropes and the stories presented on the tour so they could actively participate in guiding the guests the same way the Shadow Chasers team members did. Before and after each tour, they asked patrons to answer a survey with questions pertaining to their beliefs in ghosts, the paranormal, and a few questions to ascertain how tuned in those people were to their own body's responses to their surroundings. These questions were based on results of previous psychological studies, but tweaked a bit to fit the circumstances of this particular project. 204 people completed the pre-tour surveys, and 127 of those also completed the post-tour survey. In the interest of time and as encouragement for you to read the study, I'll skip the number crunching and the background on how they interpreted the data. It is really interesting, especially if you want to understand the science behind this particular study. The primary question was whether finding out about other people's experiences during a ghost tour could lead to a change in belief in ghosts. The answer is yes. People who ranked themselves lower on the scale before the tour reported an increased belief after the tour. Interestingly, there was no change in belief in precognition or extraordinary life forms, just ghosts. The researchers admit early in the paper that there is a natural bias toward belief in ghosts expected of patrons of a ghost tour. However, some participants could have been open-minded tag-alongs brought or dragged by an enthusiastic friend or relative. So not every participant ranked high on the belief scale from the start. You can read further details and additional questions prompted by the study in the article. One thing that a good research study will always lead to is the need for more research, especially when it comes to parapsychology. Now that you have the basics of how Langston and Hubbard researched the effect of a ghost tour on a person's belief in ghosts and the paranormal, let me introduce you to Pepper Parris. Pepper is a true oddity in Asheville. She is actually a born and raised local. Pepper heard her first ghost stories about downtown Asheville at the age of 4, when her father relayed to her mother that he had witnessed apparitions. They were of veterans, and he saw them vanish into early morning fog on the sidewalks of Haywood Street. She took her first ghost tours in Irish castles in the 1970s while attending college at Trinity University in Dublin. From there, her intrigue and interest in the paranormal was piqued. She began her touring career in 1992, conducting walking history tours in downtown Asheville for 5th graders in the school district. She conducted her first ghost tours in 2000 for Ghost Hunters of Asheville. In 2012, she started her own tour company in downtown Black Mountain, a spooky little railroad town just east of Asheville, which is still in operation. In June of 2017, Pepper assumed ownership of Ghost Hunters of Asheville, and she is thrilled to be back touring in Asheville. Pepper is a folk storyteller and a stickler for accurate history, all while she relays ghost tales that have been told by locals for more than 100 years. Before we jump into Pepper's interview, I do want to take just a moment to acknowledge that the audio quality is not up to my own standards. I was having technical difficulties that night, and we ended up recording it on Zoom. And at the time, my camera did not have a decent microphone. I now have a new Zoom camera and microphone. But I also noticed that during the first 5 minutes of her interview, there is some sort of a clicky, thumpy sound. It only lasts for about the first 5 minutes, and then the audio smooths out quite a bit. I do apologize again. Please stick through it because it is a good interview, and Pepper is a lot of fun to talk to. Hi,
Okay.
Pepper.
Hi, Nick. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Just fine, just fine.
Thanks for joining me to talk a little bit about ghost tours tonight. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name's Pepper Parris, and my company is Ghost Hunters of Asheville. And I have walking history and ghost tours in Asheville, North Carolina. I do them in downtown, and there's a historic neighborhood called Historic Montford that's just across the highway from downtown, and I do a tour over there. And then downtown Black Mountain, North Carolina. I've been doing them I've been doing tours in downtown Asheville since about 1995, history tours. And So that's kind of how I got started. I started out as working for someone and then eventually acquired the company. And then I added the Montford and the Black Mountain tours.
Cool.
So yeah, so I've been, I tell people I've been street walking for a long time.
Oh, what?
Yeah, like 25 years, man, that's kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've had a lot of experiences with lots of different kinds of people.
Oh yeah, different kinds of ghost tours over the years too. When I first started doing ghost tours, it was the traditional ones like in Charleston and Savannah, where 25 or 30 people, follow behind one storyteller, basically. And so I did that for a little while. So that's a completely different experience. When you have 25 or 30 people, you're kind of schlepping around and around downtown and trying to keep up with them. And these days, I really do more of a personal experience tour where, and COVID sort of brought it around to full circle, where I just take one group and it's really one on one, and I can connect with them and they can tell me their stuff and I can, tell my stories, and we have a much better time that way. Much better time on a ghost tour that way.
That sounds like a lot more fun than the last ghost tour that I took.
Yeah.
Way too many people and
Yeah, and who the people in the back, I don't even know why they want to come. They don't hear. And I have a pretty big mouth, but uh, anyway, yeah, it's a real different experience doing the one-on-one tours, and a whole lot more fun. And I think that there's actually a better opportunity to connect um, paranormally, I guess, if you will, when we're off trying to do, off in these places where we know there's activity and that sort of thing, and you're not, you don't have 30 people or whatever hanging around. You're just trying to connect one-on-one if you can.
yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. Um,
Mhm.
so what made you get started in ghost tours or the paranormal in
Oh
general?
my, I mean, maybe it was fate. My dad believed in ghosts, and so I believed in his ability to believe in ghosts. If you go back to your article, from a very young age, just hearing his experiences, I had an experience of my own. And then one of the things that really connected it all, or sort of, like I say, it was fate. I ended up going to college in Ireland in 1974 and 75 and 76. And one of my favorite things to do over there was to take castle tours. And they weren't like officially ghost tours because that was the 70s. I don't even think they had ghost tours back then, but they always told you ghost stories, on the castle tours. And so, I was really into all that kind of stuff and really enjoyed hearing those. And like actually had one experience in Castle Kilkenny, and felt someone touch me and stroke my hair, but it was after being told. So I don't know if it was the influence, or not, but I did have that kind of an experience. And then when I came back, life raised my kids, got back in Asheville. It's around 1995. I started doing tours for third and fifth graders, and they were history tours, but they had a couple of little ghost tours attached to them. And we did them from the elementary school kids. And then from there, it evolved into I met the woman that owned originally Ghost Hunters of Asheville and started working for her, and then took over and just kind of went from there. And so I've been doing them ever since. Yeah, have a good time with them.
Sounds like fun. I think
It
if I had ever known when I was younger that there was even a way to make money talking about ghosts, like
is
I could have
good.
chosen a completely different path. But I'm good where I am right now.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because of my belief in the paranormal or my ability to run my mouth, but I'm apparently pretty good at both of those things.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm probably too much of an introvert to really do it well.
Enjoyed the history too. I love, I didn't enjoy history as much when I was younger, but as I got older, I began to really appreciate the history of my hometown. And it's such a crazy and wild, insane history that we have in Asheville that it was really fun to get, it was easy to get addicted to telling that story. So that made it even better. And then just learning the ghost stories and adding those on and getting people's responses to that. So I was an addict from that, first time I ever gave one and got over the fear of, oh my God, these people are listening to me do this, and I've got to walk and talk at the same time, right?
Right.
But yeah, it kind of got better from there.
So, have you had like any strange occurrences during a tour, or what are some of the things that have happened that are odd, and then like what are the types of things that are just kind of typical of a tour?
You know, being in this, I guess you could say, industry, I've been exposed to a lot of different things in the paranormal tour industry. I think the coolest experience and one of the most profound ones I ever had, there was a young man that came to me and wanted to, he and his girlfriend went on ghost tours all the time, and he wanted to propose to her on a ghost tour. And so he and I sat down and we, sort of brainstormed ideas. And in Asheville, we can't go in any of the buildings. We can just tour the outside. But he had a big pocket and he was willing to pay an establishment that would let us go in. And so we have a famous old haunted building here called the S&W Cafeteria. Heard stories about it all my life, and I actually went in and introduced myself to the owner and told him this romantic story about how this guy wanted to propose to his girlfriend. And so he and his wife were kind of intrigued by that. So Patrick and I, the fellow, we got together with the owners and they toured us around this building. And it was the first time I'd been able to go in and really look at it through a paranormal investigator's eyes or a tour guide's eyes even. And he and I both, he didn't really know much anything about the building, and the owners knew some. I knew more than they did, and they took me to this one area, and I don't know how to explain it except it's like a room in between the two buildings. And we were standing there, and Patrick and I, the young man and I, were overcome by grief. And there was a waiter that had killed himself up in that area, and I didn't know where it was, and it had happened in the 40s, and I'd heard that story. But and I wasn't trying to influence him at all. As a matter of fact, he started, but we were both overcome by it. And the owners, they were pretty flipped out about it. But that was just to get set up to do it. And then a week later, we did the tour and had a real good time with that. And but that whole experience of picking up something emotionally that you weren't expecting to pick up.
Yeah.
And I've had that happen on other tours where people, they were affected emotionally in one way, empaths, and that happens, for whatever kind of haunted history Asheville has, whether it's, residual or intelligent. We sit on limestone and we have a lot of energy and a lot of, repetitive stuff or residual things that happen. We just hold all that kind of energy here. So it's not uncommon when I have someone that's an empath or psychic that's on the tour that they can connect. So I've had instances of that, where they felt like they were making a really strong connection, where other people, I think they were having a connection because they wanted to, in terms of the article and, what we're talking about here. I think that you really can influence someone to even have an experience, if you will. So yeah, so that's kind of, and the other one that's really sticks out in my mind is downtown Asheville had a lot of suicides as a result of the stock market crash in 1929, and they had over 80 jumping suicides. And so there's a lot of that residual energy. And there's one particular building called the Battery Park Hotel. And long story short, a lot of people died there. There's a big unsolved murder mystery that remains to this day. There's another murder that occurred there that it's probably a 99.9% sure that the wrong man was convicted and put to death for a murder.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of weird energy. The whole hotel was built on an Indian ceremonial ground, not a burial ground, but a ceremonial ground. And so we get paranormal photography all over the building. I can be standing outside the building, and the seniors, it's now a home for seniors. It was a very swanky hotel in its day, but now it's a home for low income seniors. They'll come out and tell us things that go when they see us standing out there, and they'll come out and tell us, oh wow, we have all these experiences in the laundry room and on the second floor where this murder happened, and so we get a lot of added bonus stories sometimes, when we're on tour up by the Battery Park. But that building, it has a lot of really, really you can feel the energy around it when you're around it. So, And probably the scariest picture on my tour comes from there. So that's another part of traditional ghost tour. I think I started maybe 25 or 30 people follow behind one storyteller, and I do that more one-on-one. So the first thing I try to do is make it a validating experience for them, because I do find that people that come on ghost tours, even when I have larger crowds, most of them, they're there because they had some kind of an experience of some sort. They're that low, uh, you know um, um, what was the term in the article, but um,
A low level believer.
low level, right? Low level, if you will. And so they want to know that they're not crazy. I think a lot of people want to know that when they come on it. And then, I do the history, and of course, uh, I let them ask questions. But also, the other thing that I use a lot is photography that's been captured in the locations that I go on my tour. So I don't know if it's my storytelling perhaps as much as it's the photography, but also because I show them how to get it, and I have them in places where we do tend to get a certain amount of paranormal photography. You can take a skeptic and change their mind really, really quick with a photo. All they got to do is get some kind of, thing in their pictures, and they're just like, okay, now I believe, and it's always guys. It's usually almost always guys. Oh, I don't believe in any of this, and I always tell them, oh, you're the one I'm going to pick on then. But yeah, if guys get pictures like that, it instantly changes their mind if they feel like they got a little bit of proof. So that kind of stuff goes on.
Wow. So you mentioned Asheville's got kind of a unique history. I have not come and I have not done an Asheville tour. I've only been to Asheville
I
a
think
couple
you
of
will.
times, and it was the last time was for a wedding at the Biltmore.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful, very
Mm-hmm.
beautiful.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I haven't really explored up there. What about Asheville is unique as far as the history and maybe the reasons for so many ghosts there?
Well, Asheville sounds like this little sweet mountain town, and actually, what Asheville is a teeny tiny itty bitty New York City. What really put Asheville on the map was George Vanderbilt. So the first people that settled here were just like unbelievably wealthy, and so that kind of started its own history. They started building big old spooky houses right away. When all these rich people moved here and started building things after George built his estate. And so I think that lends itself to the fact that primarily Asheville was rich, and those that took care of the very, very wealthy. So that started our history. And then I don't know if we were unique here, but the way that health hit here, we had we had tuberculosis, and we had lots and lots of people, wealthy people, that came here to heal, because we were actually marketed as early as 1880 as a health resort, and that it was believed that our mountain air could help your respiratory diseases. And so all these wealthy people would come here, and that neighborhood Montford that I mentioned, that's the houses that the wealthy people that built the buildings downtown, they built their big fancy houses over in this Montford neighborhood. So then, uh, and we had a downturn in the economy, and it ended up there were a lot of women in that Montford neighborhood in the like 1909 and a little bit after that, that found themselves with these big houses, and their husbands were gone because they lost a bunch of money, and they'd either gone back up north to work, or they just flat out left their wives, and then a bunch of them committed suicide. So these ladies took their houses, their homes, and they became TV sanatoriums for very wealthy people. And in that 1 mile stretch down Montford Avenue, right there by downtown, there were over 1,000 people that died a long, long way from home, in
Wow.
those houses. And they were primarily wealthy people. And they, sat on these sleeping porches. And, tuberculosis took, 80% of the people that were infected with it died, within 5 years. And so it was a long term, a decade of people dying up and down Montford Avenue. And then right on the heels of that came the Spanish flu. And that, in downtown Asheville, we had in January and February of 1918, there were over 100 people a day dying in downtown Asheville. And our one funeral home that was down there, it was so bad for a while. And it was very good that it was a very bad, bitter, cold winter, because the newspaper said just wrap your loved ones up in the sheets that they passed away in. And they were stacking the bodies literally on this little stretch of street. I'm right in the middle of downtown now, um, 2 and 3 high. And the temperatures were so low that they could keep the bodies there, and
Wow.
process them, because that's how fast it was going. So we had that. But the big thing that really changed our history, I think, in terms of it being paranormal, was when our stock market crashed. And actually, our stock market didn't crash on October 29th, 1929. There was a big cover up to make the wealthy depositors in Asheville think that their money was still there. Long story short, our stock market didn't crash here till November 30th, 1930. And when that happened, there
Oh,
were 150 suicides over the next 19 months as a result of that stock market crash. And over 80 of those were recorded jumping suicides from our fancy little buildings that we have here. So, um, that just kind of sets the stage. But then the other big thing is, in the middle of downtown Asheville is a street called Church Street. Every downtown's got one.
right.
But and without going into all the details here for the interview, we dug up 1,800 bodies that had been buried in front of all the churches in Church Street, and moved them to a place called Riverside Cemetery, which sits in the middle of that Montford neighborhood that I mentioned.
Wow.
The people passed away in Montford from TB and Spanish flu. We also have a cemetery in the middle of it with 13,000 headstones, or 13,000 graves, 9,000 headstones, and 1,800 bodies that were moved from Church Street over there. So we unsettled all these people on Church Street and moved them across the highway, basically. So that lends itself well to, and that's where we dowse. And that's another thing that I do on my tours that are different is, I teach people how to use dowsing rods and what they really are. It's not, dowsing rods aren't to um, suck in spirits. It's to detect a change in energy underground. And if you're someplace where it's not water or power or any of those things, and then you detect that change in energy, then perhaps you have something paranormal. But that we douse on that street, and I've had people connect or felt they did connect with all manner of folks. But the most interesting is, about 2 years ago, in the place where we douse, there were a couple of homeless guys got into a fight, and one knocked the other into a wall, and he hit his head and he died. And I've had people pick up talking to that man through the rods, and me never telling no one. I mean, I might have 10 or 15 people standing out there, and I'll stand one over in that area. And it's just amazing to me, Nikki, the number of times that somebody has picked up and had a conversation. This guy says he was killed here, because I teach them the yes, no,
Yeah.
at yes, no questions. And I kind of lead them through a series of questions when I'm teaching them how to use the rods. And then I just can't tell you how many times people have connected with this guy in the last couple of years. That's kind of freaky. That they come back and say, well, this guy says he died here. And it's like, now, okay.
That is,
Let me tell you what happened. Then I tell them the story, and then they're real freaked out. So
so it's sounds like it's pretty easy to take somebody who's kind of a non-believer or a skeptic and turn them
if
into
they
the
have
gift
some
of
kind of an
things like that.
experience, it only takes a second to win them over. It's amazing. I've never had somebody that was a hard skeptic and then had something happen to them on the tour, and then they'd be like, no, I still don't believe in it. When they leave, they're like, yeah.
That's
Fun to
exactly
watch them convert.
right. I'm gonna send all my skeptic friends over to you.
There you go. There you go. Well, they'll have a good time on their decline, if you want to call it that.
So, is there is there anything else about the tours or Asheville or just the paranormal in general you wanted to touch on tonight?
I was kind of making some notes. I mean, I put it on how to teach dowsing, but you don't need me to teach y'all how to dowse on the airwaves here. Um, no, I just spent a lot of time after reading through that article, and boy, it'd been a long time since I'd read a psychology and all the formulas and all that kind of stuff for research studies. But I wanted to kind of answer to it. I think that a good bit of people that come to believe in the paranormal are influenced to believe that way, that they didn't have experiences prior, and then and my stories, I know they want to have them. I find that true to be very true, as well as there's a lot of people that want to have paranormal experiences, and so they seek them out like a junkie, and they get one EVP, and it's like it pays for that $20,000 worth of equipment they bought, But I think there's a fascination with it. It's been a growing fascination. It's a new target market,
Yeah.
of people out there that are interested in having or trying to have some kind of an experience. I don't know what that says about our culture, that we're dying to connect with the dead, but it's interesting, and I think that kind of thing's always been around. I mean, I'm an old lady, I'm 62, and I remember when I was a kid, the thought of ghosts and all that, we've always been intrigued by it. So I know that a good ghost story can convert people that never had or may never had a real paranormal experience, but they'll believe in it. If their mama had it, then if mama had an experience, then it's real.
Right.
So
Right.
it must be. It's just those old crabby guys. It takes a while to bring them
Yeah.
around, but
The bring-alongs that got broken
right.
there by their wives or their girlfriends or their
Yeah,
best buddy who just is a total believer. And come on, you got to do this.
that's it. Yeah, and now after being on investigations, and most people don't get to go. Like I know you've been on investigations, and I've been on some, and most people don't really get to experience that. It's although that's kind of a new trend in marketing, if you will, but most people don't get to actually go in and connect on that deeper level that you and I have, where I do sense spirit, and I do know that it's there, and I know that there are those that haven't crossed into the light. I really feel that, and I've had enough experiences with it, to be able to sense and pick up on sadness, or somebody that's lost, and you can just kind of make it known to them that they go. Most people will never experience the paranormal that way, though. They're just going to go on a ghost tour, they're going to watch Ghost Adventures, or
Right.
that kind of stuff. And you got to be careful what you wish for, because I've been in places where I've had the snot scared out of me, and people on my tour, they would have run a whole lot fast, I mean, that would have been the end of it for them, so yeah, it's just fun being involved in it, because it's you never know what you're going to get, and you learn something new all the time about it. You really
Yeah.
do.
It
Yeah.
is. It's a great experience, especially for those of us who are empathic, because
Hmm.
I really think
It
it's
validates
it's
us.
a mixed blessing. Like,
Mhm.
sometimes you don't want to feel everybody else's pain, but to be able to connect like that and to
Mhm.
really kind of get into the emotion of whatever the energy is in the room, like you were talking about being overwhelmed with a sense of grief. It's it's not necessarily a feeling you want to experience every day, but when you realize that you are connecting with something from the past, and very likely a person from the past who's just not there in body form anymore,
Mhm.
it's there's something about it that just it's hard to explain, and you
I
wouldn't
think
know I
it's
was a
there's
writer
some of us
because
that
I
just
can't
have
find the
that
right
gene.
words.
Yeah, we just have that gene, junkie gene, or whatever.
Right.
I tell you, one of the saddest elements of doing what I've done, and because I have the ghost tour business, and I don't promote that I'm part of an investigation team for real obvious reasons. I get calls because of the ghost tour company, and then I can refer people. But I get calls from people, and it's well, I've got this ghost in my house. Can y'all come do something about it? And there's trying to differentiate. Okay, who's not just crazy that wants you to come to their house, or when you do go to do an investigation and it becomes clear that you know if there's something negative there, it's because they brought it on themselves, often, more often than not. It's more often than not, it's not a haunting, and that's kind of sad, that people kind of bring these things on themselves, and then I guess they have to manifest it into something paranormal, maybe to explain it away. I don't know,
Yeah.
but also because of the experiences you and I have had, that you can also cause activity if you bring so much negative onto yourself, whether it's drinking and drugs, or negative energy in the house, fighting, whatever's going on. That sometimes people create their own paranormal experiences, and that's kind of sad sometimes.
Yeah. And during my investigations, we have run upon those situations, and the best you can do is do no harm, do your best to do no harm, and if you realize it's not
Give them
paranormal, there's
comfort,
nothing you can
yeah.
do. Just
Give them comfort and take away their Ouija boards. Do not play with Ouija
right.
boards.
I 100%
But
agree with that.
and that I found too is you start sniffing around and you find out that there's a teenager or somebody that's doing something behind the scenes that's bringing that negativity in, and you've got to kind of become their social worker more than just their paranormal investigator, and
Right. Yeah.
that's fun. Yeah.
I've had experiences where I had to give somebody the number to Interact, which is a nonprofit here in Raleigh that helps battered women get out of their homes, because
Mhm.
during a callback, like we've gone back to the house a couple of times, it came out that she was being abused. And it's like, okay, whether he's being influenced by something paranormal in the house or he's just not
Mentally ill.
a person, one way or the other, you need to get out of this house.
Exactly.
um, and then, at that point, that's the best we can do, because we're not counselors, we're not psychologists, we're not police. We just have to, like, give the number
Well,
and
let that
pray.
impact, maybe we give them some positive energy,
Yeah,
or some empathy,
yeah,
and sometimes that's just what they need as well, to know that they're understood, or um,
yeah.
yeah.
But let's end on a happy note.
Okay, sounds to me.
So are you currently doing tours?
Yeah, I step here and there. Downtown Asheville's been kind of a wild place this summer, with a little bit of civil unrest from time to time. Sometimes I whine and say, "Why do we have that here? Isn't that what Raleigh's for?
Right.
The state capital, aren't y'all supposed to take all that?"
Yeah.
But so yeah, we've had a little bit of civil unrest. So sometimes I'll have a tour, scheduled, and then there'll be a protest scheduled, and then it's like, well, do I do it or do I not? So that's been kind of uncomfortable to have to cancel tours over some. You have to tell people why, because they want to go on that ghost tour, and they're mad if they don't, they don't get to go, and you're like, yeah, but you might get shot or something, so let's not do that. But aside from that, the flip side of it too, though, is that I've had some wonderful tours this summer. Asheville's just a great place. We have such a good history. We have such a good climate. We have such good surroundings, and there's such a variety of things here in Asheville, and so I've loved walking through downtown since I was a kid. I've watched it change over the years, and I'm just glad I was able to do it this summer. And especially once I got to start a little bit in May, people were just so grateful to have something to do, just to get out. And I was going to be a trolley tour guide this year and not walk anymore. I thought I could stop the walking. And I think I told you this before I left, and told people I've been a street walker, all my ghost tour life. And I decided I was going to be a pole dancer. But if you can think about what's the one thing that people touch when they get off and on a trolley, it's that pole. And I'm just not this summer, not this year. But it's interesting now. I can really compare it to what being on a trolley is, and that one-on-one walking personal experience with people is wonderful, and it's a little bit different. If I go back on the trolley and try to do that again next year, I'll miss the one-on-one. I don't know if I can completely ever give it up, because I love telling the stories, and it's hard to point out at buildings when you're in a trolley, and it's close, but it's not the same thing as being right out there on the street, with them. So, yeah, I'm enjoying my big season this year, and who knows what next season will bring. So,
Thanks so much to Pepper Parris for sharing her experiences with us here on the Peep Podcast. If you're ever in Asheville, look up Ghost Hunters of Asheville and book a tour with her. I'll be publishing future episodes of the Peep podcast every 2 weeks, and on the next episode, we'll be joined again by John Kruth, Executive Director of the Rhine Research Center. John is going to explain how he studied whether our emotions can affect the technology around us. He's also going to share a pretty amazing and related poltergeist story. Then we'll be joined by a woman who has had related experiences with technology for most of her life. Thanks again for listening. If you like the podcast, please give it some rating love on your favorite podcast app, share it with friends, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you have an idea for a show topic, remember it needs to be able to be studied scientifically. You can fill out the contact form at peeppodcast.com. That's P-E-E-P podcast.com. Remember, that stands for People Experiencing Everyday Paranormal. If I can find a study about it, I'll be happy to use it. You can also like our page on Facebook. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe and be well.